and thanks to DLD. Thanks for this very nice introduction. And hi, Gabriela. Thank you so much for joining us. Please give all a very warm welcome to Gabriela. A very warm welcome to Gabriela Hearst. And Gabriela, we've spoken many times before. I thought it would be interesting today for the topic now for DLD Circular to talk about your very early revelations in terms of fashion. It really began at the very beginning of your work, that you thought about the way the fashion industry uses resources not being sustainable, and about thinking about the use of very different materials, but also about recycling and upcycling. And you told me once that actually it had a lot to do with you growing up on a farm, and also with this idea of learning, from a farm. And I think it's interesting, over the last couple of months, I always do studio visits every day with artists, designers, architects. So obviously during the lockdowns, the multiple lockdowns, these studio visits became Zoom studio visits, and I did even more studio visits than ever before. And as Steffi always says, it's about patterns, no? We can see patterns that connect. So I started to see numerous patterns. I started to see artists less and less interested in, events, in short-termism, artists interested in more long-durational formats. And it's interesting, Roman Kaczarnik wrote this wonderful book, How to Be a Good Ancestor, where he really says we need to liberate society from short-termism and think about more long-durational formats. So it's not a coincidence that artists, fashion designers, architects more and more interested in less in events, but more in gardens, and that actually more and more artists are also starting farms as artistic projects. Gianfranco Baruchello, who is now 97, has been doing it since the 60s, but you have also younger artists like Ottobon Lekanga, who is starting a farm in Nigeria. And of course, with you, Gabriela, that has played a role for a very long time. So I want to ask you to tell us a bit about these beginnings and what you learned from that experience with a farm for your work.
It's really interesting what you're saying about the ancestors, because a lot of what you learn is through your ancestors. Can you hear me well? Yeah. I don't know if they hear me well, but yes, yeah. I have an echo. But everything I learned from growing up in the ranch in South America, which it was in the same way my ancestors had lived. And my mother still lives in the same place that my family's lived for 170 years. So we're talking about pre-industrial revolution habits and way of living, right? She's still off the grid. She gets the news in a long... I have a funny anecdote. She called me, yesterday, asking me, did she just heard that there was flooding in New York and if I was okay? I'm like, that was a week ago. And so it's really, she's very, very remote, and we still live in the same way that we've lived for several generations. So I've always said that in fashion, in certain way, we have to look to pre-industrialized times, right? In certain industries, we can look into the future. And the more that I hear in our industry, there's right now the terms that everyone uses is regenerative agriculture, and in order to get resources. And that's exactly what my family's been doing for nearly 2 centuries. So that goes to the point of looking at the past. And right now, what I'm working on is botanical dyes. That's my, it's everything pre-industrialization, where I'm trying to look at craft. And it really is a matter of understanding and respecting your materials and where they come from. And a farm, overall, is the highest example of circularity, right? You can have as much as your earth lets you have there. And so I think if we just look at the places and take the word industry out of the word, right? And we look at how things were made with long-lasting effects, you learn a lot. And this is what I've applied myself. And I've been lucky to have that narrow pathways set through the farms.
Thank you so much. A lot of that has, of course, to do also with using different materials. You have a complete hatred of plastic, and we worked together on a book, Remember Nature, where actually the legendary artist Harrison says it will be necessary to criminalize plastic. That's basically his campaign. And you've come up actually with different materials. You've come up with a material called Tipa by Daphne Nissenbaum, who is also a software engineer and offers a whole new, packaging alternative. Can you tell us a little bit about this invention of Daphne and how you brought that, into your business?
I mean, I met Daphne really in the first stages out of research and developing that she's been. And early on in 2017, I knew we had to change the way our packaging in our industry had been. Because what a lot of customers don't see is how the products are shipped to the stores or to the clients, right? And it can be haute couture to fast fashion. It doesn't matter. We're always wrapped in plastic. And so the idea of having a material that was biodegradable and compostable. So we were working early on because she had a lot of products done for consumer goods, supermarket products, but we didn't have the garment bags where things get shipped. And so we worked with her on developing those first stages materials that are used in fashion, and now many other fashion brands use them. Plus, we also did recycled cardboard hangers, and we are in evolution 3.0. The first ones were breaking a little bit, but now we're in a point that we don't break them at all. So we're in a good place where we're shipping our products. But I think that I hate plastic, but I hate more styrofoam. I realized how can styrofoam still be in existence, right? Styrofoam does not live this planet. So styrofoam should be banned immediately because it's also cancerogenous to humans. And as long as this earth turns, there's still styrofoam in this planet. So it's, equal hatred, but styrofoam is getting my number one hate. I don't even understand how we have it. I feel like sometimes humans, we have done a lot of wrong terms in the name of comfort or in the name of convenience.
Now, the great Swiss economist Binswanger, who since the 60s, at HSG in St. Gallen with his institute pioneered basically limits of growth, and always said that when quantity goes beyond quality, the world loses, and that's something which is very much at the heart, really, of your label, of your work with your own label, but also at your work with Chloé. And it's kind of really fascinating that you've actually started to also buy that stock from the top mills. And that, of course, brings us back to this idea of owning less, and also of, in a way, never ever, having short-termism in terms of how we use an object. I've curated this show with Enzo Mari, who passed away last year. The show is still on at the Triennale. He was in his 80s, and the visionary designer Enzo Mari always said that we need to develop long-duration objects. So he said, for example, and Forma Fantasma, the young designer, pick up this research. They basically say, we take an IKEA chair. In order for this IKEA chair to actually be responsible, we would have to use it at least 80 to 90 years, right? But we are not using an IKEA chair for 80 to 90 years. So there is a very massive problem. So this idea of long duration, so that actually also clothes, the fashion, can be used over many generations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that it's again back to the ranch, right? I still sit down in my great grandmother's chairs, and so durability is an association with quality, right? And it's adverse to quantity, as you just said, and so. Quality doesn't come from ostentatious point of view, but it comes from a utilitarian point of view for me. In order to function and last as we want it to last for many generations, you have to have quality. So it's two places where you look at that. You look at it from the perspective of the ingredients you're using and the perspective of the craftsmanship that is being used. But in our business specifically, Gabriela Hearst have had controlled growth since we started. We've been lucky to have more demand that we needed, and a business of our awareness should be much bigger than we are. But we chose to grow organically and slowly versus rapid growth when that opportunity came to us, because I don't believe in growing quality fast. It's luxury. It's an oxymoron to have luxury industrialized in the way that it's sold in many places. So I believe that what we do at Gabriela Hearst is really a work of focusing on the product and what are we doing towards our community. The collection that we're launching in 2 days. My show is in 2 days. It's really a work of. It's inspired by Hester Diamond. That you know her name very well, and she was one of the most incredible collectors, and just out of wit and imagination. And she collected minerals at the end after collecting all the most impressive contemporary art and old masters. She went on to collecting minerals, and that nature was her inspiration in her after all these collecting decades. So Hester Diamond, and then is the work with different communities, with the Navajo weavers in America, with Bolivian non-for-profit, and with non-for-profits in my country, in Uruguay. So this idea of craftsmanship and empowering others outside of ourselves, it's something that enriches the quality experience as well. So it's always satisfactory when it's not about you.
Now, one other question I had in relation to fashion is, Rose Wiley, the artist, has not really bought any clothes, I would say, since the 60s, 70s. She has always recycled and upcycled what she already had, no? And I think it's interesting. I mean, we once spoke to Martino Gampo, the designer, and he said, you know, fashion labels should kind of, and designers should kind of offer repair stations, and also thinking about repair stations. So install at the Salone Mobile, you know, with the Serpentine, repair stations where people could come and bring all kinds of objects to be repaired or actually upcycled and so on. So I was wondering how, with a label, you can address such a topic. And then also, maybe in addition to that, not only in terms of the objects, but also, of course, in terms of the events, because even if you reduce the number of events, there are, of course, still moments where you launch the collection, and you found ways to actually make these fashion shows completely carbon neutral. You did in 2019 the first ever carbon neutral runway show, where actually most of the participants, most of the materials were locally sourced, no electricity was used. Yeah, so it's two questions in one. First of all, how can a label kind of offer for objects a kind of a repair service? And how can you make, you know, the necessary event somehow completely carbon neutral? Maybe it would be great to hear more about this invention in 2019 and how you also continue it.
Yes, so the first part is, this is our commitment that we've started with when it started to become clear that we have an issue of natural resources, right? And fashion is not the only industry. We all are, our natural resources are diminishing. And so it was pretty clear that in order to continue having a business employing people, we would have to, in the future, we would have to know right now how to work with what we have. So we start our commitment of using recycled and upcycled materials, which now is becoming, when we started doing it in 2017, it was strange, right? But for me, it was a very normal concept because you learn that in the ranch. I inherit some of my mom's clothes. My mom didn't buy clothes all the time. She had allotted periods in her life where she would have her clothes made by by the family seamstress, and I inherit some of those pieces, and she would inherit pieces of her mother. So clothing was very hard to make, right? I'm also experiencing, as I said before, with botanical dyes. So making garments was a very complex process. So it had a value and a quality to it that was enough to be a hand-me-down. And so we lost that during, the Second World War, I would say, became after Second World War. And most of these things comes, from needs in the moment. But so we have a percentage of recycle and upcycle materials that we use every season. And last year, in our ready-to-wear for all of 2020, we were over 50% upcycle and recycle. So this year we want to be hitting by the end of 60 to 70%. So on the ready-to-wear. So it's really about huntering and gathering for us. Like, for example, I'll make one shirt in dead stock cotton and a beautiful dead stock cotton. The maximum I can make is 100 of those shirts. And so I have to make one. So it's more about engineering it, but it's actually exciting to learn how to work with the leftovers. But that's what been my training. So I'm used to it, and I think that's where creatives can get excited about, because we're all going to have to be using things that already exist. So better start training. And then when it comes to carbon neutrality, it was really working when we did the store in London with Norman Foster. He wanted to have the lowest impact in environmental. He believed that we could make a luxury store that had the lowest impact without reducing any of the inspirational part that a luxury store has to have, and beauty. And so that made me think about it, if you use, for example, I like to use my experience of going to the doctor, right? My cholesterol was high, and I had a number, and I had to reduce it, right? And so I went on to reduce it. But how can we reduce our carbon footprint if we didn't know the number? So at that time, nobody knew a number of a carbon footprint for a show. So then you can't really reduce if you don't have those data. So we started collecting that data and understanding, and each season we understand more. For example, we don't have flowers in the show. It has to be localized product. Obviously, vegetarian, no meat in the assortment of food that we offer to our guests. Everything is repurposed. Nothing gets. But these are becoming common practices now in our industry. That makes me very happy, because the production company that we work with, which is one of the largest ones in the industry, is applying the same belief systems to other brands as well. So in a way, I always see what the work that we do as a place of generating ideas and see if they can be scaled. And so we work with EcoApp, that in each show we offset whatever carbon footprint we produce with a gold standard non-for-profit. And this year we're using water in Madagascar, which is one of the big things. Like, I have a circle drawing where it's like, get yourself away from fossil fuels addiction, right? Then we go to the zero waste to less overconsumption and overproduction. Overproduction pushes overconsumption. And then you have to go into the rehabilitation and preservation of water and our environment. So it's all of these kind of moving parts that you have to be hitting at all times. So that's kind of like the targets where we are always knowing where we're standing and why are we doing what we're doing.
Gabriela, thank you so much. You're an amazing role model. We're incredibly grateful that just 2 days before your big show, you took time to join us here at DLD. A big round of applause for Gabriela Hearst.
Hans, thank you for having me. And I will always be looking forward to meeting you.
We have to wait a little for our next show. So I will do a ping pong with Hans Ulrich. Hans Ulrich, you're one of our oldest friends of DLD. I think you've been there 2006 for the first time.
But it started even before DLD, because of Art and Brain.
Of course, Art and Brain of the Hubert Burda Foundation. How did you come to Art and Brain? And what is Art and Brain? Here's Stefan Filzmeier sits here from the Brain Lab. Here is he. Brain Lab is one of the coolest companies in Munich. Check it out, Brain Lab.
And Brain Lab connects very much to Art and Brain because actually I had just started in the early 90s. I was a baby curator. I had done my first show.
Early 90s?
Yeah, and there was an article published in Germany.
How old have you been there? How old have you been there?
Yeah, early 20s. And then I got a phone call from your office, Steffi, and from Hubert's office, and from Christa Maar, that they wanted to meet. And it was actually all about a conference which the then Academy for the Third Millennium had organized about the connections between neuroscience and art, and the idea was that the 90s were the decade of the brain. It's still a very relevant topic, of course, today. And the idea was to organize a conference and an exhibition about that theme. And I kind of thought, maybe it would be interesting to do it actually in the Science Center where the neuroscientists work, so in Zurich at KFA with Ernst Pöppel and many other neuroscientists, and to bring the artists there. So what we did is that we organized everything which usually happens with a conference, but then did not do the conference, but only the coffee breaks. So, it's a bit like the interstitial spaces, no? When people really meet and introduce to each other. So it was a kind of a non-conference, and a lot of collaboration started. A lot of things happened in that long coffee break, between art and science, and it then led to lots of other, sort of salons and projects where one sort of tries to instigate conversations among each other. And I think always, Steffi, that you also don't really organize conferences. You produce reality patterns, you said the other day. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I love pattern recognition. I'm not a technical person, or I'm not a political person, but I'm not a whatever. I'm a creative person, dear screen. But what I really love is to see patterns between topics, between people, between systems, between many things. Here we have an artificial intelligence professor from Oxford, but he is in a call right now. Come here, come please, come. I introduce you. He's a famous guy. This is DLD, by the way. You from the artificial intelligence profession. What is pattern recognition to your ideas? This is, by the way, Aldo Faisal.
Hi. So pattern recognition is to us mainly, how can I train a machine to recognize a pattern that repeats itself in one way or another? It's not very creative. It's the opposite of creativity.
So how come that I'm not a machine? Obviously not, but I love pattern as well. What is this happens in humans that they recognize patterns?
I think that's the beauty of the human mind, because it's very different in that you recognize an existing pattern, but you can also see something new that connects to that pattern. And that's something that in artificial intelligence we would like to be able to do, because now we're starting to think about creativity and finding new solutions, not just old solutions.
Thank you very much. This was a wonderful break filler.
Big round of applause for Aldo. Big round of applause.
Good.